The first thing that went wrong that morning was the medicine. Vesper Hale stood at the apothecary counter with her last coins spread across her palm, watching the old herbalist weigh her desperation against his empty shelves. The bottle she needed, smoked glass, violet wax seal, sat behind him like a taunt. "It's gone up again," he said, voice rough with guilt. "Caravans aren't coming through the pass. Too many raids, too much fear." Vesper's throat tightened. "That's everything I have," she said quietly. The man's eyes flicked to her thin fingers, to the basket on her arm with its patched handle, to the way she stood like someone bracing for another blow. He hesitated, long enough to make hope flare, then slid the bottle back into its slot. "I'm sorry, girl." Sorry didn't stop lungs from filling with water. Sorry didn't cool fevered skin. Sorry didn't keep a child from coughing until his ribs ached like glass. Vesper nodded anyway. "Thank you," she lied, and gathered her coins as if they mattered. Outside, the city of Stone Harbor moved like a living machine, busy, loud, indifferent. The morning market was swelling toward noon. Fishmongers sang out prices. Bakers waved steaming rolls at passers-by. Dock workers hauled rope and crates with shoulders like iron. Above the noise, the black and silver banners of the Crown Pack snapped in the sea wind, their wolf crest stitched in thread that caught the light like a blade. Vesper hated those banners, not because the Crown Pack was cruel, because the Crown Pack was powerful, and power always had a way of overlooking people like her. She adjusted the basket on her arm and headed toward the lower market, boots scraping stone. She still had to buy food. She still had to stretch a day's wages into something edible. She still had to climb back to the cramped loft above the dye house where her brother lay bundled in blankets, fever-eyed and trying not to be a burden. And she would still have to look him in the face and promise what she couldn't guarantee. "Tomorrow," she'd say. "Tomorrow I'll get it." By the time she reached the market square, her patience was stretched thin enough to tear. That was when someone slammed into her. Hard. The basket flew from her arm. It struck the ground with a wet thud and split open. Thin carrots skittered across the street. A loaf of bread rolled into a puddle that was definitely not only water. 2 onions bounced once and vanished under a cart. Vesper stared at the wreckage. For one heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then she snapped. "Oh, you have got to be—" She didn't shout. She didn't draw attention the way her mother had once warned her never to, but her anger still found a way out, spilling in a tight, furious whisper as she dropped to her knees to salvage what she could. "Careless idiot. Walking like the street belongs to you. May your socks soak forever. May your pillow always be warm on both sides. May—" Something answered her. Heat flared beneath the leather wrap around her wrist. Vesper went still. No, not now. Not here. She pressed her wrapped wrist hard against her ribs, as if pressure could smother what lived beneath her skin. For years, she had kept it quiet, hidden, bound, ignored until it became background noise. It was not supposed to wake. A shadow fell over her. "A sharp tongue," a voice said calmly. "And surprisingly specific curses." Vesper swallowed. Slowly she looked up. The man standing there did not belong in the lower market. His cloak was dark and travel-dusted, but it hung on him like something tailored for a different world. The boots were scuffed, yes, but expensive under the grime. His posture was relaxed without being careless, like a blade resting in its sheath. He was tall in a way that made people adjust around him without realizing they'd moved. Dark hair brushed his collar, slightly wind-tossed. His face was all clean angles and quiet arrogance, beautiful in a way that didn't ask permission. But it was his eyes that made Vesper's stomach drop. Gold. Not brown, not amber. Gold, like fire held behind glass. Those eyes were fixed on her as if he'd known her for years. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, snatching a carrot before it could escape under a boot. I didn't—" "Yes," he said, voice deep and steady. "You did." Heat rushed up Vesper's neck. She dropped her gaze, focusing on what remained of her ruined groceries. "Then I apologize, truly. Today has been—" Terrible. A pause, then to her shock, the man crouched. Right there, in the grime, in the market filth. He reached out and picked up her half-soaked loaf, brushed it clean with the side of his glove, and placed it carefully back in her basket. His hands were elegant, but scarred. Fighters' hands disguised as noble ones. "You don't have to do that," she managed. "I know." He picked up another carrot, set it down gently. "But since I apparently possess the awareness of a drunk ox," he said, "it seems only fair I make amends." Vesper's head snapped up. He was smiling, not the empty smile of someone humoring a lower-born girl, not the smug grin of a man enjoying her embarrassment, something real, something that softened the severity of his face into something dangerously human. "Who are you?" Vesper asked, cautious now. The man's gaze flicked, briefly, to the wrapped wrist she kept pressed tight against her side, then back to her face. "Darian," he said simply. Just a name. But the market had changed. Vesper felt it, the way nearby voices had dipped, the way people had shifted away, making space, the way a merchant who had been shouting prices a moment ago suddenly found something fascinating on the floor. Respect didn't spread that fast for no reason. Her pulse began to kick in warning. "You're—" she started. Darian straightened, still calm, still smiling like he was enjoying this too much. "Hungry?" he cut in and offered his hand as if that was all that mattered. "Because I am, and you look like you haven't eaten properly in days." Vesper stared at his outstretched hand like it might bite her. "You want to feed me," she said slowly, "because you knocked over my basket." "I want to feed you," he said, "because you look like you carry the world on your back and still find time to curse creatively." That should not have made her throat burn. That should not have felt like someone seeing her. "This is a trap," she said, mostly to herself. Darian's smile widened just enough to show teeth. "Possibly," he admitted, "but not the kind you're imagining." Vesper's instincts screamed to leave. People like him didn't offer dinners to women like her unless they wanted something. Favor. Entertainment, a new cruelty to pass the evening. But the heat beneath her wrist wrap pulsed again, sharp, insistent, like it recognized him, like it had been waiting. "I don't even know where you'd take me," she said. "The copper lantern," he replied, as if he'd already decided. "By the old sea wall, at sunset." "And if I don't show?" Darian's gaze held hers, steady as stone. "Then I'll assume you were wise," he said softly. "And I'll be disappointed anyway." He didn't push, didn't force her hand, didn't grab her wrist. He simply kept his palm open, waiting. Vesper hesitated, one heartbeat, two. Then, against every survival instinct she owned, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, fire raced up her arm, not pain, recognition. Her breath hitched hard enough to hurt. Darian went very still. For the briefest second, his eyes flared brighter, molten gold igniting behind them like something ancient had opened its eyes. He felt it too. His fingers tightened, not to trap her, just enough to steady them both. Then he released her hand abruptly, as if it took effort to let go. His voice came out rougher than before. "Sunset," he repeated. "The copper lantern." And then he stepped back, turned, and walked away like he hadn't just shifted the axis of her life. Vesper remained kneeling in the street, basket half filled, heart pounding, wrist burning beneath its bindings. She watched him disappear into the crowd. Only when he was gone did she realize her hands were shaking. Only when she tried to breathe did she realize her lungs had forgotten how, because she had cursed a stranger in a market, and the stranger had smiled and asked her to dinner. And whatever lived beneath the wrap on her wrist had just woken up like it recognized its king. If you're already curious about where this is going, take a second to like this video. It tells me you want more slow burn stories like this, and it helps this one reach the right audience. Vesper Hale spent the rest of the afternoon convincing herself not to go. She scrubbed dye stains from her hands until her knuckles burned. She repaired a tear in a stranger's tunic that should have taken 10 minutes, but somehow stretched into an hour. She climbed the narrow stairs to the loft above the dye house and sat beside her brother, admitting only half-truths while changing the cool cloth on his forehead. "You look tired," he murmured, voice thin as paper. "I'm fine," she said automatically. It was the lie she used most. By the time the sun began to slide toward the sea, painting Stone Harbor in gold and rust, her resolve was fraying. "This is foolish," she told herself for the 100th time. Men like Darian Thorne did not offer dinners without cost. They collected people the way others collected favors. They smiled while doing it. And yet, the heat beneath the leather wrap around her wrist pulsed, slow and steady, like a second heartbeat. It had not gone quiet since the market. Vesper changed her mind twice while dressing. She chose the cleanest dress she owned, simple gray wool, mended carefully at the seams. She braided her hair tight and neat, no loose strands to give away nerves. She re-wrapped her wrist with extra care, fingers lingering just long enough to remind herself why she hid it. Before she could talk herself out of it again, she left. The copper lantern sat at the edge of the old sea wall, where the city thinned and the smell of salt replaced smoke. It wasn't the grandest establishment in Stone Harbor, but it wasn't cheap either. Polished wood gleamed through wide windows. Lamplight spilled warmly onto the street. Laughter drifted out, low and refined. Vesper stopped across the road. She checked the door, checked the sign, checked the time by the sinking sun. Still early enough to turn back. Her feet didn't move. "You are not prey," she reminded herself. "You are not helpless." She crossed the street. The moment she reached for the door, it opened. Darian stood there. He'd changed. Gone was the travel-worn cloak. He wore dark trousers and a pale shirt, open at the throat, sleeves rolled just enough to show strong forearms dusted with dark hair. His boots were polished now. His hair still damp as if he'd washed the road from himself. When his gold eyes found her, the noise of the street faded into nothing. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "Neither was I," she replied honestly. A corner of his mouth curved. "Yet here you are?" He stepped aside, holding the door without touching her, giving her space to decide. That choice, small as it was, settled something tight in her chest. Inside, the copper lantern was warm and rich with scent. Roasted meat, citrus, clean wine. The floor gleamed, conversations hummed at a civilized volume. A few patrons glanced their way, then looked away very quickly. Vesper noticed. Darian guided her not to the main dining floor but toward a narrower corridor at the back. A private room waited beyond a carved door, lanterns glowing softly inside. Her stomach flipped. "This feels excessive," she said. "I prefer privacy," he replied. "And honesty tends to follow it." The door closed behind them. The room was small, intimate. One table, 2 chairs, a single lantern casting amber light across polished wood. No windows, no easy exits. Vesper forced herself not to retreat. Darian pulled out her chair. She hesitated, then sat. He waited until she was settled before taking his place across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. "Are you going to tell me," Vesper asked finally, "why the entire market acted like you were a storm they didn't want to stand under?" Darian smiled faintly. "You noticed that." "I survive by noticing things." A server appeared silently, poured wine into Darian's glass, then glanced at Vesper with questioning eyes. "No wine?" Vesper said quickly. "Water's fine?" Darian inclined his head. "As she wishes." The server vanished. Vesper folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "All right," she said. "I ate your bread. You helped my basket. Dinner accomplished. What do you actually want?" Darian studied her the way a hunter studies wind, not hungry but alert. "When you cursed me," he said slowly, "something happened." Her pulse jumped. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His gaze flicked once again to her wrapped wrist. Vesper's hand moved instinctively to cover it. "It's nothing," she said too fast. "Just an old scar." "Scars don't respond." Darian replied quietly. And they don't recognize blood. Cold slid down her spine. You're mistaken. Am I? The door opened briefly as food arrived: roasted fish, glazed roots, fresh bread that steamed when torn. The interruption broke the tension just enough for her to breathe. She ate cautiously at first, then hunger took over. She hadn't realized how empty she was until the first bite hit her tongue. Darian watched without comment, though his eyes sharpened with something unreadable. "When was the last time you ate properly?" he asked. "That's none of your business." That wasn't an answer. She swallowed. "Yesterday." He didn't believe her. "Why me?" she asked, changing the subject. "You could have chosen anyone." "I didn't choose," Darian said. "You collided with me." "Convenient." "Fate rarely asks permission." She snorted softly. "You sound like a priest." His lips twitched. "I'm far worse." Vesper pushed her plate away, appetite suddenly gone. "Who are you really?" Darian leaned back slightly, studying her in the lantern light. The sharp planes of his face softened in shadow, but his eyes stayed bright. "My name is Darian Thorne," he said, "and I lead the Crown Pack." The words landed like a dropped blade. Vesper's breath left her lungs. Leader of the Crown Pack, alpha of the ruling wolves, king by another name. She stood so fast her chair scraped. "I should go." Darian was on his feet instantly, not blocking her, not touching her, but close enough that she felt his presence like heat. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "That's what powerful men always say." Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps? Or understanding? "You have every reason not to trust me," he said quietly. "But I need to know something." Her heart hammered painfully. "Show me your wrist, Vesper." She backed away. "No." His voice softened. "Please." The word unsettled her more than a command would have. "My mother died because of this," she said, voice shaking despite herself. "Burned for having what you're hunting." Darian went very still. "She was marked," he said, not a question. Vesper's eyes burned. "She saw things," she whispered. "Truths people didn't want, futures they were afraid of. And you inherited it." She laughed, sharp and broken. "Congratulations. You found your monster." "I found a woman who has been hiding for years," Darian said, "and who woke something ancient when she touched me." That stopped her cold. "You felt it too," she said. "Yes." Silence pressed in. "There's a prophecy," he continued. "Old, twisted by fear. It speaks of a marked seer and a ruler bound in blood, of ruin or rebirth." Her stomach dropped. "And you brought me here to decide which I am," she said. "Threat or tool?" Darian's jaw tightened. "I brought you here because the moment you cursed me in that market," he said, "I realized the prophecy had a face." She shook her head, backing toward the door. "I won't be your execution test. I haven't decided to kill you. That's not reassuring. It's the truth." She reached for the door. "Vesper." His voice stopped her, not loud, not commanding, just raw. "I don't want this to end in blood." She turned slowly. "Then why does it always come to that?" "Because people are afraid of what they don't control," he said, "and because they refuse to choose differently." Their gazes locked. The heat beneath her wrist surged, painful now, insistent. Outside, the sea crashed against stone. Inside, something old and dangerous stirred. And neither of them knew yet that this dinner was only the beginning. Vesper did not leave. She stood with her hand on the door long enough for her pulse to slow from panic to fury, long enough to recognize the familiar pattern rising in her chest. Run, hide, survive. She had done that her entire life. It had not saved her mother. Slowly, she lowered her hand. "If this is a trap," she said without turning, "you're doing a terrible job convincing me otherwise." Darian exhaled, a sound caught somewhere between relief and restraint. "It isn't a trap," he said, "but it is dangerous. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." She turned to face him fully now. "Then start being honest. His gaze sharpened, not offended, impressed. Very well. He moved first, not toward her, but back to the table. Sat. Folded his hands together as if preparing for judgment rather than delivering it. There are factions within the Crown Pack, Darian began. Old families, new power, people who profit from unrest. For years they've whispered about a prophecy they barely understand. Vesper crossed her arms. Let me guess. I'm the monster at the center of it. You're the unknown, he corrected. And unknowns terrify people who survive on control. She swallowed. The prophecy speaks of a marked seer, Darian continued, voice steady. One whose sight is tied to truth rather than vision. Not just what might be, but what is, stripped of illusion. Her wrist burned. And it speaks of a ruler whose blood awakens old magic, he added. A king whose power is bound to choice, not conquest. Vesper laughed bitterly. That sounds poetic enough to justify murder. Yes, Darian said softly. It has. Silence stretched between them. My mother saw a riot 3 days before it happened, Vesper said quietly. She warned the magistrates, named the men who would die. They called her dangerous. Darian's jaw tightened. They burned her in the square, Vesper went on, because people would rather kill the truth than change their behavior. I know, he said. She looked up sharply. You know. I was there, Darian said, not close enough to stop it. Young enough to be powerless, old enough to remember. The room seemed to tilt. You watched, she whispered. I watched, he said, voice rough, and I swore that if I ever held power, I would not let fear decide who deserved to live. Her anger wavered, cracked by something dangerously close to grief. Then why am I here? She asked. Why not leave me hidden? Because you're already not hidden, Darian replied. You flared in the market. Anyone sensitive enough would have felt it, and some of them are far less patient than I am. That settled like ice in her veins. They're looking for me. Yes. She closed her eyes briefly. Then I should leave the city, she said. Tonight. No, Darian said immediately. You wouldn't make it past the outer wards. She opened her eyes slowly. You put wards on your own city? On threats, he corrected, and on protections. The city doesn't know which side you're on yet. Her laugh was thin. And you do? No, he admitted. But I know this. If they find you first, you won't get a choice. That word again. Choice. Vesper dropped back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. What do you want from me? She asked. Darian leaned forward, elbows resting on the table now. 1 week, he said. Come to the Citadel. Stay under my protection. Help me understand what the prophecy actually means before someone forces an ending we can't undo. And if I refuse? Then I'll still protect you, he said without hesitation. But I'll do it blind. She searched his face for deception. Found none. And after a week, she asked. If you choose to leave, Darian said, I will personally see you out of the city and ensure no one follows. Her wrist flared sharply, like it was listening. What about my brother? She asked quietly. He's sick. That's why I needed the medicine. Darian's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind his eyes. What illness? Glass lung, she said. The slow kind. He nodded once. I'll have a healer sent tonight, he said. No cost, no conditions. She stared. That's not charity, she said suspiciously. No, Darian agreed. It's responsibility. The room went very still. You're asking me to walk into a fortress ruled by people who would kill me if they knew what I was, she said. I'm asking you to walk into a fortress ruled by me, Darian replied. There's a difference. Her heartbeat thudded painfully loud. And if your council disagrees? She asked. They already do, he said flatly. That earned a sharp, incredulous laugh from her. You don't sound worried. I am, he said. I'm just not backing down. Vesper leaned back, staring at the lantern light above them. Every instinct screamed that this was a mistake. Every buried part of her. the one her mother had tried to protect, the one that had burned awake in the market, whispered that this was inevitable. 1 week, she said finally. No chains, no binding magic, no surprises. Darian nodded. Agreed. And if at any point I decide you're lying, she added, I leave. You won't? He said quietly. Her eyes snapped to his. That's not confidence, she warned. That's arrogance. A corner of his mouth lifted. No, that's trust. Something in her chest twisted painfully at that. Fine, she said. 1 week. The moment the words left her mouth, the heat beneath her wrist surged, sharp and unmistakable. Darian sucked in a breath. You felt that, she said. Yes, he replied hoarsely. For the first time since the market, neither of them pretended otherwise. Finish your meal, Darian said after a moment. At dawn, I'll come for you. And after dawn? She asked. After dawn, he said, eyes glowing faintly gold. Nothing stays simple. Vesper looked down at her wrapped wrist, at the quiet fire pulsing beneath it. For the first time in years, she didn't try to smother it, because she had agreed. And whatever she was, the Alpha King had just chosen to stand in its path instead of ending it. Dawn came too soon. Vesper had slept no more than an hour, if closing her eyes and replaying every terrible possibility counted as sleep. She lay rigid on the narrow pallet above the dye house, listening to the city wake around her, gulls crying over the docks, cartwheels rattling stone. Somewhere far off, the low horn that marked the changing of the guard. Her wrist burned steadily beneath its bindings, not painfully, expectantly. She rose before the sun fully cleared the horizon and dressed without lighting a lamp. Simple clothes, boots worn thin at the soles. She braided her hair tight again, hands steady from long practice at hiding fear. Her brother stirred as she adjusted the blanket around him. You're leaving, he murmured. For a bit, she said softly. Rest. There's a healer coming. His eyes fluttered open wider. We can't afford— I know, she interrupted gently. It's handled. He studied her face, too perceptive for his age. Be careful, he said. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to his. Always. By the time she stepped into the street, the city was washed in pale gold. Morning fog clung low near the harbor, and the banners of the Crown Pack stirred lazily above the rooftops. Darian Thorne was already waiting, not with guards. Not with ceremony. Just him, mounted on a dark horse, cloak clasped neatly at his shoulder, posture relaxed but alert. He dismounted the moment he saw her and took a step back, giving her space. You came, he said. I said I would. I wasn't certain. She raised an eyebrow. You don't strike me as a man who doubts. I doubt plenty, Darian replied. I simply don't let it stop me. He offered her the reins of a second horse, smaller and calmer, clearly chosen with care. I don't ride, she said. His mouth curved faintly. You will. She stared at him, then at the horse, then back at him. This week is already going very poorly. But she took the reins. He helped her mount, without comment, hands firm and respectful, not lingering. When she was settled, he swung onto his own horse with effortless grace. As they rode through Stone Harbor, Vesper felt the city change around them. People noticed. Conversations quieted, heads bowed, not dramatically but instinctively. Merchants stepped back from the street center. Dock workers straightened. They weren't bowing to her. They were bowing to him, and she was riding beside him. Her stomach tightened. They passed through the inner gates without stopping. Guards saluted sharply, fists to chests. One of them glanced at Vesper, curious, wary, but said nothing. The citadel rose ahead of them, carved from dark stone and anchored into the cliffs overlooking the sea. It was less a palace than a fortress shaped by centuries of siege and survival. High walls, narrow windows, watchtowers that didn't pretend to be decorative. As they approached, the burning beneath Vesper's wrist intensified, not in warning, but recognition. She swallowed. Inside the walls, the air felt different, older, charged. Darian dismounted first, then offered his hand again. This time she didn't hesitate. The moment their skin touched, the heat surged, but softer now, like something settling rather than flaring. Several nearby attendants noticed. Vesper saw it in the way their eyes widened, in the way a murmur rippled outward before being quickly smothered. Darian noticed too. He ignored it. A woman approached them, tall, silver-haired, eyes sharp as cut glass. She wore the insignia of a high-ranking pack officer. "My Alpha," she said, bowing deeply. "You didn't announce your return." "I chose not to," Darian replied. "This is Vesper Hale." The woman straightened slowly, gaze sliding to Vesper with careful scrutiny. "And she is?" "My guest," Darian said calmly. "Under my protection." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The woman, Commander Risa, if Vesper heard the murmurs correctly, hesitated only a fraction of a second before bowing again. "Of course," she said. "Welcome to the Citadel." Welcome. Vesper had never been welcomed anywhere that mattered. They walked the halls together, footsteps echoing against stone. The Citadel was alive with movement, messengers hurrying, warriors drilling in the courtyards below, scholars moving between towers with stacks of books under their arms. Eyes followed her, not hostile, not kind, assessing. Darian led her to a chamber overlooking the sea. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. A large table dominated the room, already laid out with maps, scrolls, and sealed documents. "This will be yours," he said, "for the week." She stared. "This room is bigger than my entire building." "Then it's overdue," he replied. A servant appeared silently. "Bath is ready," the woman said. "And food, when she wishes." Vesper's mouth opened. Darian raised a hand slightly. "Give us a moment." The servant withdrew. Silence filled the chamber. "This is going to start rumors," Vesper said. "It already has." "And you don't care?" Darian met her gaze steadily. "I care," he said. "I just don't let fear govern me anymore." Her wrist pulsed warmly, as if in agreement. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the table. "Today, we start with history, not prophecy, not visions, context." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he said, eyes darkening thoughtfully. "We see what you can really do." Vesper folded her arms, grounding herself. "You understand," she said slowly, "that if this ends the way it ended for my mother—" "It won't," Darian interrupted, not sharply, not loudly, certainly. "If anyone tries to touch you without your consent," he continued, "they answer to me." She searched his face for doubt. Found none. For the first time since stepping inside the Citadel, something inside her loosened. "All right," she said. "Then let's begin." Darian nodded, and somewhere deep beneath the stone floors of the Citadel, old magic stirred, aware that the marked seer had crossed a threshold she could never uncross again, because the city had bowed, and the Alpha King had chosen to stand beside her in full view of it all. By midday, the Citadel no longer felt merely watchful. It felt awake. Vesper noticed it first in small ways, the way the air thickened when she stepped into the Eastern Archive. The way the lantern flames leaned toward her instead of straight up, the way her wrapped wrist grew warm whenever she passed certain sealed doors. The Citadel recognized her. That realization sat heavy in her chest. Darian noticed too, though he didn't comment on it immediately. He moved through the archive with practiced ease, selecting scrolls from shelves carved directly into stone. Some were bound in leather so old it had turned brittle. Others were etched onto thin plates of metal, runes hammered deep by hands long dead. "These are pre-crown records," he said, laying several out across the table. "From before the packs unified, before kings." Vesper leaned over them cautiously. "These aren't myths," she murmured. "They're field accounts." "Yes." She traced a finger near one line of text and felt a sharp pulse under her wrist binding. Didn't touch it, didn't need to. I see why you started here, she said. Prophecies don't exist in isolation. They're responses. To pressure, Darian agreed. To collapse. To change. She swallowed. Her mother had said the same thing once. Quietly, at night, like a confession. They worked in near silence for hours. Not the awkward kind, the focused kind. Vesper read, cross-referenced, corrected translations where scribes had softened words that were meant to be sharp. Darian listened, really listened when she spoke, asking questions without challenging her authority in areas she clearly knew better. That alone unsettled her more than hostility would have. Mid-afternoon, her wrist began to ache. Not a flare. A pull. She stiffened. Something's wrong, she said. Darian looked up instantly. Where? Not wrong, she corrected slowly. Just calling, he stood. Show me. She hesitated only a moment before loosening the leather wrap. The mark bloomed into view. It was not a symbol so much as a living pattern, interlocking lines that shifted when stared at too long, as if they refused to be fully understood. In the citadel's light, it glimmered faintly, responding to something beneath the stone. Darian inhaled sharply. That's stronger than the records described, he said. That's because they were written by people afraid of it, Vesper replied. Fear blunts accuracy. The mark pulsed. Once. Twice. Then heat rushed outward, not violently, but insistently. Vesper gasped and braced herself against the table. Darian was at her side instantly, hands hovering, not touching. Tell me what you're feeling, he said. Depth, she whispered. Like standing at the edge of deep water and realizing something is moving below. Can you control it? She closed her eyes. Don't fight it. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. Guide it. I can try. She let her senses open, not wide, not reckless, just enough. The world shifted, not into visions, into clarity. The table vanished, the archive walls fell away. In their place, threads, hundreds of them, power lines, intent, fear, loyalty, lies. They ran through the citadel like veins. Vesper staggered, breath catching. Darian's hand closed gently around her elbow, grounding her without pulling her away. Easy, he murmured. Her vision snapped back. She blinked rapidly, heart pounding. I saw the council, she said hoarsely. Not faces, motives. Some are clean, some are rotting. Darian went very still. How many? She swallowed. Enough. That word landed hard. You're certain? He asked. Yes. Silence filled the archive. Then Darian nodded once. Then we're already behind. Vesper looked up at him sharply. You believe me? I do, he said simply, and that's why this can't stay quiet. Her stomach twisted. You're not planning to expose them already? No, Darian replied, not without proof. Truth spoken too early gets buried. He paused. But now I know where to look. She sat heavily in a chair, suddenly drained. That wasn't even a full vision, she said, just contact. And it left you like this, he noted, which means you've been suppressing it for years. She met his gaze. Survival requires it. His jaw tightened. Survival shouldn't require silence. Before she could respond, the door opened. Commander Risa entered, posture rigid. My Alpha, she said, the council has requested an unscheduled session. Darian's expression didn't change. They've sensed the shift, he said quietly to Vesper. She nodded. They would. Risa's gaze flicked briefly to Vesper's exposed wrist. Her breath caught. Darian noticed. Commander? He said evenly. Vesper Hale remains under my protection. Any questions regarding her presence come through me. Risa bowed immediately. Of course. But the damage was done. The Citadel knew now. As Risa left, Vesper wrapped her wrist again with trembling fingers. That was a mistake, she said. No, Darian replied. That was inevitable. He crouched slightly so they were eye level. You did well, he said, but from this point on, we move carefully. She laughed weakly. You mean we weren't before? His mouth curved faintly. Before, we were studying history, he said. Now we're challenging it. Vesper leaned back, exhaustion dragging at her bones. And if they decide I'm too dangerous? Darian's eyes glinted gold. Then they'll have to decide how badly they want to challenge me. For the first time, she understood something crucial. This wasn't just about prophecy. This was about power shifting hands, and she, Vesper Hale, had just touched the fault line. If this story has pulled you in so far, let me know by dropping a like or a comment. And if you enjoy stories where power, choice, and fate collide, consider subscribing. There's more coming. By nightfall, the Citadel no longer merely watched Vesper. It listened. She felt it as she moved through the corridors, soft pressure against her senses, like a held breath. The mark beneath her bindings had gone quiet again, but not dormant. It waited, alert, as if learning the shape of its surroundings. Darian did not leave her side. Not openly. He didn't hover, didn't guard her like an object to be displayed or hidden, but every route they took bent subtly around security. Every doorway they passed seemed to already know he was coming. Power, recognized power. They dined that evening in a smaller hall overlooking the sea. Only 2 servants attended them, hand-picked, Darian explained, because they were clean. The word sent a chill through her. So there are already lists, she said. There have always been lists, Darian replied. Most rulers pretend otherwise. She ate slowly, appetite dulled by tension. Beyond the windows, the sea churned darkly, waves slamming stone with a rhythm that matched her pulse. "Why me?" she asked again, softer this time. "Why did the mark respond to you?" Darian didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "My bloodline was sealed centuries ago," he said. "The Crown Pack's power wasn't always stable. Too many alphas tearing each other apart. The founders bound the throne to restraint." She frowned. "Restraint?" "Choice," he corrected. "An alpha who rules by force alone loses the bond. The power withers. Only one who chooses balance keeps it alive." Her wrist warmed faintly. "And the prophecy says that bond can only be fully awakened by a seer who sees truth," he continued. "Not devotion, not fear, truth." She swallowed. "So if I walk away—" "The bond remains incomplete," Darian said. "The throne stays brittle, the fractures deepen. And if I stay," she said quietly, "I become a target." Yes. Honesty again. It shouldn't have been comforting. It was. After dinner, Darian escorted her back to her chamber himself. The halls were quieter now, the day's activity replaced by the muted echoes of guards on rotation. At her door, he paused. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." She studied his face, the controlled strength, the faint tension beneath it. "You're not sleeping," she said. He smiled faintly. "No." "Why?" "Because if something moves tonight," he said, "I want to be awake for it." Her chest tightened. "You don't trust your own walls." "I trust them," he replied. "I just don't trust what walks within them." She hesitated, then spoke before she could lose nerve. "Thank you," she said, "for not treating me like a weapon." Darian's gaze softened. "I won't," he said. "Unless you ask me to." She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breath unsteady. Sleep came in fragments, not dreams. Impressions, stone corridors bleeding shadow, voices layered atop one another, threads tightening, a single phrase repeating not in words but in meaning. Choose. She woke just before dawn, heart racing. The mark burned, not gently this time, urgent. She threw on her boots and cloak and left her chamber without thinking. The Citadel felt wrong, too still, like the air before a storm. She followed the pull instinctively, down staircases she didn't remember learning, through corridors that shifted subtly to accommodate her passage. The walls listened. And then they spoke. Not aloud, but through sensation. Below. She descended. The lower levels of the citadel were older than the crown pack itself. Here, the stone was darker, veins of mineral glittering faintly. Runes carved into the walls pulsed dimly as she passed. She reached a sealed door. It should have stopped her. It didn't. The mark flared, and the lock yielded. Inside was a chamber long forgotten. At its center, an ancient stone circle etched with the same shifting patterns that lived beneath her skin. And within it, a man knelt, bound by sigils, blood at his mouth. His eyes snapped open the moment she crossed the threshold. Gold. Not Darian's gold. Darker, sharper. Hunger twisted through them. "Well," he rasped, smiling despite the blood. "You finally woke." Vesper staggered back. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man laughed softly. "Someone the council thought they buried," he said. "Someone who knows exactly what you are." Footsteps thundered behind her. Darian burst into the chamber, power rolling off him in waves. His eyes flared as they locked onto the prisoner. "You!" he snarled. The man's smile widened. "Hello, brother." The word hit like a blade. Vesper's breath caught. Brother. The truth slammed into her senses all at once. Lies, betrayal, bloodlines twisted by ambition. The council hadn't just feared prophecy, they had tried to control it, and whatever choice Vesper made next would decide which brother walked free and which one burned. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chamber seemed to contract around the three of them, the ancient stone, the glowing sigils, the air thick with old magic that had been waiting far too long to be acknowledged. Darian stood rigid, every line of his body pulled tight as a drawn blade. The man in the circle, his brother, smiled through bloodied lips. "You always did look like you were carved from duty," he said hoarsely, "even when you were a boy." Vesper's instincts screamed. This was not a reunion. This was a fault line splitting open. "You said he was dead," Darian said quietly. The word dead carried more threat than any shout. The man chuckled, a wet, broken sound. "So did they. Funny how often councils lie when it suits them." Vesper's wrist burned violently now, the mark reacting not just to proximity, but to history, to betrayal layered so thick it distorted the air. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady by force alone. The man's gaze slid to her, sharpening with interest that made her skin crawl. "Ah," he murmured. "You're her." Darian stepped instantly between them. "Do not look at her." His brother laughed again, still protective. "Still predictable." "Answer her," Darian growled. The man leaned back against his bindings, wincing as the sigils flared. "My name," he said, eyes never leaving Vesper, "is Cale Thorne, firstborn of the Crown bloodline." Vesper sucked in a breath. Firstborn. That explained the hunger in his eyes, the rawness of his power, the way the sigils strained instead of fully containing him. "You were declared unfit," Darian said, stripped of claim. "Because I refused to kneel," Cale shot back, "because I saw what the crown was becoming and said it aloud." "You tried to seize power by force," Darian replied. "You killed." "I killed traitors," Cale snapped. "Men who sold our people for stability and called it peace." The mark flared so violently Vesper staggered. Both brothers froze. Darian turned to her instantly. "What did you feel?" She pressed a hand to her wrist, breath shallow. "He's telling the truth," she said slowly. "And lying." Kyle's smile widened, delighted. "Oh, I like you." Darian did not. "The council imprisoned you," Vesper continued, eyes unfocused as clarity flooded her. "Not because you were unfit, but because you were uncontrollable." "Yes," Kyle said softly, "and because they needed Darian." Darian stiffened. "They needed a ruler who would choose restraint," Kyle went on. "Someone predictable, someone moral." His gaze sharpened. Someone they could box in with duty. Silence thundered. Darian's voice was barely audible. "They told me you lost yourself." Cale's laughter died. "No," he said. They lost me. Vesper's stomach twisted. This was not a simple villain. This was a man broken and sharpened by betrayal. And the Citadel had kept him alive like a contingency. "Why now?" Darian asked. "Why let her find you?" Kyle's eyes flicked to Vesper's wrist, glowing faintly beneath the leather. "Because the mark woke," he said, "and when it did, every lock on this place trembled." He leaned forward as far as the sigils allowed. "She's not just a seer," he said. "She's a key." The word echoed through the chamber. "No," Darian said flatly. "Yes," Kyle countered. "She opens truth, doors, bonds, and if you won't use her, I won't use her at all," Darian snapped. "She's not a weapon." Vesper felt something shift at that. Kyle studied his brother with new interest. "Then you'll lose," he said, "because the council already plans to force her hand." Vesper's blood ran cold. "What?" she demanded. Kyle smiled grimly. "They've been watching you since the market. Measuring, calculating, the moment you flared in the archive confirmed everything." Darian's power surged, the air vibrating. "They won't touch her," he said. "They don't intend to," Kale replied calmly. "They intend to bind her." The word slammed into Vesper's chest. "You felt it, didn't you?" Kyle pressed. "The Citadel leaning toward you, the walls listening." "Yes," she whispered despite herself. "That's because this place was built to answer your kind," Kyle said, "and the council knows it." Darian turned sharply to her. "Vesper, I know," she said, eyes blazing. "They want control." Kyle watched them both, expression sharpening. "You see?" he murmured. "You're already aligned." Darian faced his brother fully now. "You will not manipulate her," he said. "You will not escape. And you will not turn this into civil war." Kyle tilted his head. "Then kill me." The chamber went deadly still. Vesper's heart slammed painfully. "Do it," Kyle pressed softly. "End the loose thread. Prove you're stronger than me." Darian did not move. Seconds stretched. Vesper stepped forward. "No," she said. Both brothers looked at her. "You don't get to force his choice," she continued, "and you don't get to turn me into leverage." Kale smiled slowly. "Strong." "And you," she turned to Darian, "don't get to protect me by pretending this isn't bigger than both of you." Her wrist burned, not in warning, in approval. The sigils around Kale flickered. Darian's eyes widened. "What did you just do?" he asked. Vesper swallowed, feeling the weight of what she'd touched. "I told the truth," she said, out loud, to both sides. The stone circle responded. Kyle hissed as the bindings tightened, not in punishment but recalibration. The chamber itself had chosen. Kyle stared at her now, no hunger left in his eyes, only awe. "Well," he whispered, "it begins." Alarms rang above them, low, resonant, unmistakable. The Citadel had noticed, and somewhere upstairs, the council was already moving. Darian took Vesper's hand without asking. "This ends now," he said. "On our terms." As they turned toward the stairs, Kale's voice followed them. "Choose carefully, little seer," he called, "because the crown will not survive neutrality." Vesper didn't look back. She already knew. There was no neutral ground left, only truth, and what it demanded. The alarms did not scream. They sang. Low, resonant tones rolled through the Citadel like a heartbeat amplified by stone, vibrating through bone and blood alike. Vesper felt each pulse echo beneath her skin, the mark on her wrist burning brighter with every step as Darian pulled her up the spiraling stairs. "They're calling a full council," she said breathlessly. "Yes," Darian replied, and locking down the inner halls. As if to confirm it, iron gates slammed shut somewhere above them. The sound reverberated through the stairwell. "They mean to separate us," Vesper said. "They'll try." Darian's grip tightened, not possessive, but anchoring. When they emerged into the upper corridors, the Citadel had transformed. Guards moved in disciplined lines, weapons not raised, but ready. The air was charged with restrained violence. Commander Risa intercepted them at the junction. "My Alpha," she said urgently. "The Council has invoked emergency authority." Darian stopped. "So quickly?" he said. "That tells me everything." Risa hesitated, then leaned closer. "They know about the lower chamber." Vesper felt the truth ripple outward instinctively. "They were always going to," she said. Risa's gaze snapped to her wrist. The leather wrap glowed faintly. "She's not bound," Risa said quietly. "They'll demand it." Darian's expression hardened into something ancient. "No," he said. Risa swallowed. "Then we're out of time." They moved, not toward the council chamber, but past it. Darian led Vesper into a narrow passage most people wouldn't notice, one that bent sharply downward before rising again. Old air met them, thick with dust and salt. "Where are we going?" Vesper asked. "The High Gallery," Darian replied. "Public space. They can't move against you there without exposing themselves." "And Kale?" A flicker of something crossed his face. "Contained, for now." They burst into the gallery as the council session began. The room was massive, tiered stone seating encircling a central dais carved with the sigil of the Crown Pack. Members of the council rose in surprise as Darian entered, Vesper at his side. Murmurs erupted instantly. "You breached protocol!" one elder snapped. "You bypassed summons!" another accused. Darian stepped onto the dais without waiting for permission. "I answer to the Crown," he said calmly, "and the Crown answers to the people." Silence fell, sharp and brittle. Vesper's heart pounded, but the moment she looked out across the gallery, something steadied her. Threads. So many threads. Fear, ambition, guilt. Loyalty stretched thin. She could see them all. "You bring an unbound seer into council space?" an elder woman hissed. "Have you lost control, Alpha?" "No," Darian replied. "I've found it." The woman turned on Vesper. "You," she said sharply, "do you know what you are?" Vesper met her gaze without flinching. "Yes. And you think yourself fit to stand here?" "I think," Vesper said slowly, "that anyone afraid of truth has no right to rule." The gallery erupted. "Silence!" Darian roared. The sound cracked like thunder. The room obeyed. Vesper felt the mark surge, hot, commanding. Without meaning to, she stepped forward. "Enough," she said. Her voice carried, not magically, truthfully. "You hid Kale Thorne because he was inconvenient," she continued. "You burned my mother because she saw what you refused to face. You fear me because I cannot be bought." The elders froze. One of them, thin, sharp-eyed, laughed nervously. "Lies." Vesper closed her eyes, opened herself. Just enough. The gallery shifted. Illusions peeled away. Threads snapped taut, then severed. Gasps rang out as council members recoiled, not from pain but exposure. Darian stared at her in stunned awe. "Tell them," he said softly. Vesper looked out over the gallery, voice steady despite the fire coursing through her. "You fractured the crown long before I arrived," she said. "I'm only showing you the cracks." One elder collapsed into his seat, face ashen. Another whispered, "She sees everything." That was when the first guard moved. Steel rang. Chaos exploded. "Protect the Alpha!" someone shouted. Darian moved instantly, pulling Vesper back as a blade flashed where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. The crowd scattered. "Down!" Darian barked, but Vesper didn't crouch. She lifted her wrist. The mark blazed. The floor beneath the attacking guard locked, stone rising just enough to trap his boots mid-stride. He crashed forward, weapons skidding away. The room went dead silent. Vesper stared at her own hand, shocked. "I didn't know I could do that," she breathed. Darian's laugh was sharp and wild. Neither did they. Commander Risa's voice rang out. "Stand down!" Half the guards froze, half did not. The council had fractured. "This ends now," Darian said, stepping forward, power rolling off him in waves. "Any who stand with fear, leave. Any who stand with truth, stay." The room hesitated. Then, one by one, people moved. Some fled, some knelt. Some stood frozen, unable to choose. Vesper felt the weight of it crush her lungs. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No," Darian said fiercely. "This is what was already broken." A roar shook the gallery as the outer doors slammed open. Kyle's voice echoed from the entrance. "Brother," he called, "you really should have waited for me." Vesper turned. Kyle stood unbound, smiling. The fracture widened into a chasm, and the crown was no longer whole. The gallery did not breathe. It waited. Cale Thorne stood framed by the open doors like a question no one wanted answered, cloak torn, eyes burning with that darker gold that spoke of power sharpened by bitterness. Behind him the alarms had fallen silent, as if even the citadel held its breath. Darian did not move. "Still dramatic," he said evenly. "Still arriving late." Kyle's smile cut. "I had to make an entrance. You were about to crown yourself a martyr." Vesper felt the pull immediately. The tug between brothers like gravity split in two directions. The mark on her wrist burned, not in pain, but in demand. "Choose." She stepped forward. Both brothers turned to her at once. "This ends now," Vesper said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Not with blood, not with secrets." Cale laughed softly. "You think words end wars?" "No," she replied. "Truth does." She opened herself, fully this time. The gallery vanished. In its place, everything stood naked. The council's bargains, the quiet executions, the choice made years ago to hide Cale instead of killing him, to groom Darian instead of trusting him, to burn a woman in a square because fear was easier than reform. The truth poured outward like light through cracked stone. People screamed, some wept, some fell to their knees, crushed not by magic, but by knowing. Cale staggered. "What are you doing?" he rasped. "Showing you," Vesper said, eyes blazing, "what you've both been standing on." She turned to Darian. "You were chosen because you would restrain yourself," she said. "Not because you were weak, but because you would choose not to become him." Then she turned to Cale. "And you were broken because you were right too early," she said softly, "because you spoke truth without mercy." Cale's breath shuddered. "That doesn't absolve you," she continued, "but it explains you." The mark flared white-hot. The citadel answered. Stone groaned. Old runes ignited. The crown sigil above the dais split cleanly, then reformed into something new. Not a wolf's head, two, balanced, equal. Darian felt it, power flooding him, not wild, not restrained, but whole. He gasped as the bond settled fully into place for the first time in his life. Kyle dropped to one knee, choking on a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She chose you," he whispered. Vesper shook her head. "No," she said, "I chose truth." She faced the gallery. "The crown does not survive by silencing what it fears," she declared. "It survives by facing it." Silence fell. Then Commander Risa stepped forward and knelt. One by one, others followed. Not to Darian, to the truth standing beside him. Cale lifted his head slowly. "And me?" Vesper met his gaze. "You don't get the throne," she said, "but you don't get buried alive either." Darian spoke at last. "Exile," he said, "not as punishment. As protection from what you become when power is the only voice you hear." Cale closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had softened. "Fair," he said hoarsely. "For once." The guards lowered their weapons. The fracture sealed, not erased, but healed enough to hold. Later, as dawn broke over the sea, Vesper stood on the citadel balcony alone. Darian joined her quietly. "You could have left," he said. "After all this." She smiled faintly. "And let someone else decide what truth costs?" He studied her. "What will you do now?" She looked out at the waking city, the frightened, the hopeful, the changed. "I'll stay," she said. "Not as your weapon, not as your oracle." "As what?" he asked. As someone who makes sure the crown never forgets why it exists. Darian bowed his head, not as a king, but as a man. The mark on her wrist cooled at last, not because it slept, but because it had been heard, and in a city built on fear, truth had finally been allowed to breathe. The city learned new habits, slowly, uneasily, like hands relearning how to unclench. Weeks passed, then months. Markets reopened without armed escorts. Council sessions ended without shouted threats. Records once sealed were unrolled and read aloud, ugly truths included, because pretending they had never existed was no longer an option. Vesper Hale did not sit on a throne. She refused it politely, firmly, every time it was offered. Instead, she walked. She walked the outer districts where cracked stone still bore the memory of neglect. She walked the docks where laborers watched her warily at first, then with cautious hope. She walked into council chambers unannounced, sat without ceremony, and asked the questions no one wanted asked. Who benefits? Who pays? Who is not in this room? The mark on her wrist no longer burned. It warmed. Darian Thorne ruled differently than the kings before him. Not because he was gentler, he wasn't, but because he no longer mistook silence for stability. He listened. He acted. And when fear whispered that strength meant control, he remembered the woman who had stood between two brothers and refused to let the world burn just to make a point. They were not always together. That was the part no one expected. Some nights, Darian returned from council to find her asleep in the library, surrounded by half-read texts. Other times, Vesper vanished for days into the city, returning with dirt on her boots and answers he hadn't known how to ask for. When they did stand side by side, it was never for spectacle, only for decisions that mattered. One evening, as dusk spilled gold over the rooftops, Darian found her on the eastern wall. "You're thinking too loudly," he said. She smiled without turning. "You're getting better at noticing." He joined her, resting his forearms on the stone. "The council wants you to formalize your role." "Of course they do. They're afraid of what you are without a title." She looked at him then. "Are you?" Darian didn't answer immediately. "No," he said finally. "I'm afraid of a kingdom that forgets you exist." That earned him a quiet laugh. The mark pulsed once, soft, satisfied. Not because destiny had won, but because choice had, because fear had been faced instead of fed, because truth, once spoken, had refused to go back to sleep. Vesper leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start dismantling the grain tariffs." He groaned. "You never rest," she smirked. "Neither do broken systems." Below them, the city breathed, scarred, imperfect, alive, and for the first time in generations, the future was not written in prophecy. It was being written by people brave enough to choose it. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Stories like this are about power, choice, and what happens when truth refuses to stay quiet. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, courage, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if you want more stories where destiny bends, crowns crack, and ordinary people change the course of kingdoms, subscribe. It's free, and it helps these stories reach more people like you.